Grace Eleanor was 19 years old and completely homeless. Her mother had died when Grace was only 7 years old, taken by cancer far too young, leaving Grace with only fragmented and painful memories and an overwhelming sense of loss that would follow her entire life. Her father had abandoned them when her mother first became sick, unable to handle the emotional weight and financial burden of watching his wife deteriorate slowly over months of treatment and suffering. Grace had been raised by her grandmother in a small Appalachian town in West Virginia, in a modest home filled with love and history. But her grandmother had passed away unexpectedly when Grace turned 18, leaving her completely alone in the world with no family, no support system, no one who claimed her or wanted her. Grace had spent the last year living on the streets of the Appalachian region, sleeping in homeless shelters, working minimum wage jobs at local diners and stores, trying to survive day by day in a harsh world that didn't care about her. She worked as a housekeeper, cleaning homes for wealthy people, earning barely enough money to eat regularly. She saved every penny, every single dollar she could possibly spare from her meager wages. She dreamed constantly of having a place of her own, a sanctuary where she could remember her mother and her grandmother without pain consuming her entirely every moment. She dreamed of home, of belonging, of being safe. Then she found the listing for an abandoned stone cottage in the Appalachian Mountains for $1 at a county property auction. The cottage had been built in the 1800s by Scottish immigrants who had settled in the mountains seeking freedom and a new life in America. It was made entirely of stone, weathered and beautiful, sitting alone on a hillside surrounded by ancient oak and maple trees. The cottage had been abandoned for decades, completely forgotten by the world, neglected by time and the elements. The county wanted it gone from their records and their responsibility. They were willing to sell it to anyone for $1 just to be rid of the burden. Grace had been saving money carefully for months, denying herself basic comforts, working extra shifts at restaurants and hotels, skipping meals to accumulate her meager savings in a small notebook. She had exactly $1.45 to her name after a year of hard work and sacrifice. She used $1 to buy the stone cottage at the county auction held in the courthouse. A kind woman at the courthouse helped her navigate the paperwork and legal processes. 2 weeks later, she received the official deed in the mail. The stone cottage in the Appalachian Mountains was now officially hers. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. When Grace first walked up to the stone cottage, climbing the overgrown path through the mountains with her backpack, she felt like she was coming home to a place she had never been before but somehow knew in her soul. The cottage was small but sturdy, built from solid stone that had weathered over 120 years of mountain weather, rain, snow, and harsh winters. The roof was partially collapsed, allowing rain and leaves and debris to fall inside the structure. The windows were broken and boarded up. The door hung dangerously on rusted hinges that screamed with age. But the stone walls stood strong and beautiful, weathered to a soft gray color that seemed to hold the history of generations of families who had lived within those walls. Grace spent the first week exploring every inch of the cottage carefully and methodically. She found the main room with a fireplace made entirely of stone, built by hand over a century ago. She found a small bedroom with an old wooden bed frame still standing. She found a kitchen area with an old wood-burning stove still intact. She found a loft space above the main room accessed by a wooden ladder. Everything was covered thickly in dust and decay and the accumulation of decades of abandonment and neglect. But the structure was fundamentally solid. The stone was strong and would last centuries more. It was in the loft, hidden carefully behind a loose stone in the wall that she almost missed, that Grace found it. A tin box. An old metal tin box, carefully sealed and preserved for who knows how long. The box was heavy and substantial in her hands, surprisingly well preserved despite its age. Grace opened it carefully, her hands trembling with anticipation and emotion. A gold wedding band with intricate carvings. A diamond engagement ring with a stone that caught the light beautifully. Pearl necklaces and bracelets in various styles. Emerald earrings that gleamed green. Sapphire brooches set in gold. Ruby rings. Each piece was exquisite and valuable, clearly crafted by skilled jewelers and handed down through generations. Beneath the jewelry were envelopes. Old envelopes containing letters written on delicate paper. Letters written in elegant handwriting dated from the 1900s through the 1960s. Letters from women to their daughters. Letters from mothers to their children. Family letters spanning generations and decades of love and connection. Grace opened one of the letters carefully with trembling hands. It was dated 1914, written by a woman named Margaret to her daughter Eleanor. The letter spoke of love, of dreams for the future, of hopes that her daughter would build a beautiful life. Eleanor. That was her grandmother's name. That was her name too, her middle name that she shared with generations of women in her family. Grace sat on the dusty loft floor and wept intensely, understanding in that overwhelming moment that she had been guided here by something beyond mere chance or luck. That her mother and grandmother had somehow led her to this place from beyond the veil of death. That this cottage held her family's entire history within its stone walls. She read through the letters carefully, each one revealing more about her family's journey. Letters from her great-great-grandmother Margaret describing the journey from Scotland to America in 1885. Letters from her great-grandmother Eleanor describing the building of this cottage, stone by stone. Letters from her grandmother describing her childhood running through the mountains. And letters from her own mother, written before she became sick, expressing her dreams for Grace's future. Over the following months, Grace began the careful process of restoring the stone cottage to its former beauty. She hired workers to repair the roof, to fix the broken windows, to clean the interior thoroughly. She reinforced the stone walls that had weakened slightly. She restored the fireplace to working condition. She created a beautiful home within the stone walls that had protected her family for over 100 years. She decorated the walls with photographs of her mother and grandmother. She hung her grandmother's quilts. She made the cottage a sanctuary and a memorial. She researched the jewelry carefully and discovered that the pieces were worth approximately $50,000. They were heirlooms that had belonged to her family for generations, passed down through mothers and daughters, preserved in this cottage waiting for the right descendant to discover them and continue the legacy. She used some of the money to continue restoring the cottage carefully. She used some to pay for her education at a nearby university. Grace enrolled in college at a nearby university, studying historical preservation and genealogy intensely. She became passionate about preserving family histories and helping people reconnect with their roots and their heritage. She learned that her family had come from Scotland in the 1800s, that her ancestors had built this cottage with their own hands, that she carried their blood and their strength and their resilience in her own body. She established a small museum in the restored cottage, displaying the jewelry and the letters, telling the story of her family and the immigrant families who had settled in the Appalachian Mountains. She shared her grandmother's handmade quilts and her mother's childhood drawings. She created a space where people could come and learn about their own family histories and feel connected to something greater than themselves. Today, Grace is 23 years old. She lives in the stone cottage in the Appalachian Mountains, the cottage her ancestors built with their own hands 120 years ago. She runs the family museum and shares her family's story. She has reconnected with distant cousins she never knew existed, building a family again. She has transformed her loss into a beautiful legacy that honors her ancestors. Grace Eleanor was 19 years old and homeless when she bought a stone cottage for $1. It was the best dollar she ever spent. Because what she found there was not just vintage jewelry and heirlooms worth money. She found her family. She found her history. She found proof that her mother and her grandmother had loved her enough to leave her a legacy that would sustain her and guide her forever. If you believe that our ancestors guide us from beyond, subscribe to this channel.